Have you ever seen a room full of people go completely silent? Not the awkward kind of silence, but the kind where everyone is holding their breath because something so powerful just happened that nobody wants to break the moment. That's exactly what happened one night on The Tonight Show, and what you're about to hear is a story that still makes people cry decades later. Picture this. It's the 1960s, and America is in the middle of the Vietnam War. Families are glued to their television sets every night, desperate for any news about their sons, brothers, and fathers fighting thousands of miles away. The war is tearing the country apart. Some people think we should be there. Others are protesting in the streets, and everyone is scared and confused. But through all of this chaos, there's one place Americans can go to forget their troubles for just a little while. That place is a Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Now, if you don't know who Johnny Carson was, let me tell you. He was the king of late-night television. Every single night, millions of people would stay up past their bedtime just to watch him. He would tell jokes, do silly skits, and interview celebrities. He had this amazing gift of making people laugh even when times were hard. His show was like a warm blanket at the end of a long, difficult day. People trusted him. They felt like he was their friend, sitting right there in their living room. But on this particular night, something different was going to happen. Something that nobody in that studio audience expected. Something that would change the way people thought about the war and the brave men fighting in it. The show started like it always did. Johnny came out in his perfectly tailored suit, doing his famous golf swing as he walked to his desk. The band played, the audience clapped and cheered, and Johnny started telling his jokes. Everyone was laughing and having a good time. But then, as the show went on, Johnny's face changed. He became more serious. You could see it in his eyes that he was about to share something important. He reached down and picked up a piece of paper from his desk. The audience got quiet because they could tell this wasn't part of the usual routine. Johnny looked at the camera, and he looked at the people sitting in the studio, and he said he wanted to share something with them. He explained that he had received a letter, and this wasn't just any letter. This letter was written by a young soldier who was serving in Vietnam, and it had been sent home to his family. Now, you have to understand something about this time in history. Soldiers in Vietnam didn't have cell phones or the internet. They couldn't just send a quick text message to let their families know they were okay. If they wanted to talk to their loved ones back home, they had to sit down with a pen and paper and write letters. These letters would take weeks to arrive. Families would wait by the mailbox every single day, praying for news. When a letter finally came, it was like receiving a piece of treasure. Parents would read these letters over and over again, touching the paper their son had touched, trying to feel close to him even though he was so far away. The letter Johnny was holding had somehow made its way to his desk. Maybe a family member sent it to him. Maybe it had been passed from person to person until it reached the studio. However it got there, Johnny knew this letter needed to be shared with the world. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. His voice, which was usually filled with humor and lightness, became soft and gentle. You could hear the respect in every word he spoke. The soldier who wrote this letter was describing what life was like over there in Vietnam. He talked about the heat that was so intense it felt like you were being baked alive. He described the mosquitoes that were everywhere, biting constantly. He mentioned the rain that would come down so hard you couldn't see 2 feet in front of your face. But the soldier didn't complain. That's what was so remarkable. Even though he was in one of the most terrible situations a person could be in, even though he was scared and tired and far from home, he didn't ask for sympathy. Instead, he wrote about his buddies, the other soldiers he was serving with. He called them his brothers. He said that even though they came from different states and different backgrounds, they had become a family. They looked out for each other. They shared their food, their jokes, their hopes, and their fears. The studio audience was absolutely silent now. You couldn't hear a single cough or whisper. Everyone was listening to every single word. Johnny kept reading, and his voice started to shake just a little bit. The soldier wrote about missing home. He missed his mom's cooking. He missed the sound of his dad's voice. He missed Friday night football games and driving around town with his friends. He missed all the simple, ordinary things that we take for granted every single day. Then the letter took an even more emotional tone. The soldier started talking about why he was there. He said he didn't fully understand all the politics of the war. He admitted that sometimes he questioned whether any of it made sense. But he said he believed in something bigger than himself. He believed in protecting freedom. He believed in standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. He believed that even if he didn't make it home, his sacrifice would mean something. By this point, tears were streaming down the faces of people in the audience. The camera operators, the stagehands, the band members, everyone was crying. And Johnny Carson, the man who made his living making people laugh, had tears in his eyes too. His voice cracked as he read the final lines of the letter. The soldier ended by telling his family how much he loved them. He said that no matter what happened, they should be proud of him. He told them not to be sad, but to remember the good times. He signed the letter with his name and a simple sentence, "Don't worry about me. I'm right where I'm supposed to be." When Johnny finished reading, he carefully folded the letter and placed it back on his desk. He took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. The silence in that studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For what felt like forever, there was just complete and total silence. Finally, Johnny looked up at the camera. He didn't try to make a joke to lighten the mood like he usually would. He didn't try to move on to the next segment. Instead, he just spoke from his heart. He talked about the young men who were fighting in Vietnam. He said that regardless of how anyone felt about the war itself, these soldiers deserved our respect and our gratitude. They were doing their duty. They were being brave when everything around them was terrifying. They were sacrificing everything, including their lives, because they believed it was a right thing to do. Johnny reminded everyone watching that these weren't just soldiers. They were someone's son, someone's brother, someone's friend. They were real people with real dreams and real families waiting for them to come home. He said that the least we could do was remember them, honor them, and pray for their safe return. The audience finally started to applaud, but it wasn't the usual enthusiastic clapping you hear at a TV show. It was slow and respectful, the kind of applause you give at a memorial service. Some people were openly sobbing. Others were hugging the person sitting next to them. The whole atmosphere had completely changed. What started as a fun late-night show had become something much more meaningful. That moment on The Tonight Show became legendary. People who watched it that night never forgot it. They talked about it for years afterwards. They told their children and grandchildren about the night Johnny Carson read a soldier's letter and the entire studio fell silent. It became one of those cultural moments that defined a generation. But why did it have such a powerful impact? What made this particular moment so special that people still talk about it today? I think there are a few reasons. First, it was real. In a world of entertainment and distraction, Johnny Carson showed people something authentic and true. That letter wasn't written by a screenwriter or a politician. It was written by a real soldier with dirty hands and a heavy heart, sitting in a jungle thousands of miles from home. The emotions in that letter were genuine. The fear was real. The love was real. The sacrifice was real. And in that moment, everyone watching felt connected to something bigger than themselves. Second, it reminded people of our shared humanity. The Vietnam War was dividing America like nothing had since the Civil War. Families were fighting at dinner tables. Friends were ending friendships over their political beliefs. The country was being torn apart. But in that moment, when Johnny read that letter, none of that mattered. It didn't matter if you supported the war or protested against it. It didn't matter if you were liberal or conservative. Everyone could agree on one thing, that young soldier deserved our respect and our compassion. He was a human being doing something incredibly difficult, and he deserved to be honored. Third, it broke through the noise. We get so caught up in our daily lives that we forget about the people who are fighting for us. We forget about the families who are waiting and worrying. We forget about the sacrifices being made so that we can live in safety and freedom. Johnny Carson's reading of that letter cut through all the distractions and forced people to pay attention. For those few minutes, everyone had to stop and think about what was really happening in Vietnam. The soldiers in Vietnam faced horrors that most of us can't even imagine. They were young men, many of them just 18 or 19 years old, thrown into a war zone where death could come at any moment. They waded through swamps and jungles, never knowing if the next step would trigger a hidden trap. They watched their friends die. They dealt with diseases and infections and mental anguish that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. And through it all, they kept going. They kept fighting. They kept believing that their sacrifice mattered. And then they came home to a country that didn't always appreciate what they had done. Unlike soldiers from other wars who were welcomed back as heroes, many Vietnam veterans returned to protests and anger. People spat on them, called them names, treated them like they were the enemy instead of recognizing them as the brave men who had answered their country's call. It was one of the darkest chapters in American history, and it's something we should never forget. That's why moments like Johnny Carson reading that letter were so important. They reminded people to separate their feelings about the war from their feelings about the warriors. You could disagree with the war and still honor the soldiers. You could protest the government's decisions and still support the troops. These weren't contradictory positions. They were both necessary. Johnny Carson understood this. He knew that his platform as America's most beloved TV host gave him a responsibility. He could have just stuck to jokes and celebrity interviews. He could have avoided anything controversial. But he chose to use his voice to shine a light on something that mattered. He chose to give that soldier a voice when so many soldiers were being ignored or vilified. The impact of that moment extended far beyond that one night. It changed the way some people thought about the war and the soldiers. It inspired others to write to their own soldiers, to send care packages, to show support in whatever ways they could. It created a ripple effect of compassion and understanding that spread across the country. Today, we live in a very different world. We still have soldiers serving in dangerous places around the globe, but we've learned some lessons from Vietnam. We've learned that even when we disagree with military actions, we must always support and honor the men and women who serve. We've learned that behind every uniform is a real person with a real family who loves them and worries about them. We've learned that a few kind words or a simple thank you can mean the world to someone who is far from home and facing danger every day. The letter that Johnny Carson read that night is a reminder of something we should never forget. Freedom isn't free. The peace and safety we enjoy comes at a cost. There are people out there right now, at this very moment, standing guard so that we can sleep safely in our beds. There are families saying goodbye to their loved ones, not knowing when or if they'll see them again. There are soldiers writing letters home, trying to stay connected to the lives they left behind. We owe them more than we can ever repay. We owe them our gratitude, our respect, and our remembrance. We owe it to them to never take for granted the freedoms they fight to protect. We owe it to them to be better, to be kinder, to be worthy of their sacrifice. Johnny Carson showed us how to do that on that unforgettable night. He showed us that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop, listen, and honor someone's story. He showed us that silence can speak louder than words when that silence comes from a place of deep respect and emotion. He showed us that in our divided world, there are still things that can bring us together and remind us of our common humanity. So the next time you see a soldier in uniform, take a moment to thank them. When you hear a story about someone serving overseas, stop and really listen. When you feel tempted to get caught up in political arguments about military actions, remember that behind every decision are real people whose lives hang in the balance. Honor them. Respect them. Never forget them. That's what Johnny Carson did on that remarkable night, and that's why people still talk about it today. He gave us a gift, a reminder of what really matters. And in a world that often seems to have lost its way, we need those reminders now more than ever. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, I want to ask you to do something. Hit that like button right now to show your respect for all the soldiers who have served and are currently serving. Share this video with your friends and family because this is a story that everyone needs to hear. And subscribe to this channel so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Together, we can keep these important moments alive and make sure that the sacrifices of our soldiers are never forgotten. Thank you for watching, and may we always remember to honor those who gave everything for our freedom.